Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, episode 299, and it is part 2 of the little discussion that we have been having on tarps. So last week, we went over a ton of stuff with tarps. And this week, at the end of last week's video, we said we were going to be talking about what to look for, how to set them up, how to maintain them, and how to put them away. Now, for some reason, all I am seeing is a blank screen going out on the YouTube thing. Can somebody that's out there listening tell me if indeed you can see us and what is going on? I have no idea what the difficulties are I've been having here, but oh no, it's decided to.
Gosh.
I don't know, might have cut off the first of that. Let's start again, I guess. So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Atlantic Bushcraft Adventures. Tonight, we are on episode 299, and it is part 2 on the discussion we've been having about tarps. So last week, we talked a ton about tarps. The episode went a little long, which we kind of expected from the get-go. And we started off with, literally everything when it came to tarps. Talked about materials, some of our experiences. We talked about them in general, things like that. This week, we thought we'd talk a little about, or we said last week we would talk about what to look for in a tarp. If you're tarp, oh my gosh, the old accent is coming out in me now. I can't find words tonight. Hopefully that gets better. So what to look for if you are looking for a tarp, how to set that tarp up, or a couple suggestions of the ones you should start with, because that could be a loaded question. We could do an episode on that alone. How to maintain these tarps and how to put them away at the end, because there is a little debate about that. There is some truths, there is some yes and no's, and then there's some do your research and pick your opinions.
For sure. And not everyone is going to be comfortable with each option for some of this stuff. So, you have to find what works for you. What is your reality, I guess. So, what to look for in a tarp. And we briefly talked on this a little bit from last month, remember, because we both said we really like a lot of types. It gives us more options, right? So when I'm looking for a tarp, what I have learned to do, because I know that I don't always set up my tarp the same way. I like the functionality of being able to set it up multiple ways. I look for a lot of touts, and I look for solid touts that I think are going to be secure enough to handle the stresses that the tarp could go over.
No, 100%, and I agree with you on that one too. Tie-outs, you can never have enough of them. And like I said, we have talked about that last week, and that still holds true this week. I think tie-outs are a great thing. I even sometimes end up adding some tie-outs to tarps, just so I have more options. Like Ben said, the more tie-outs you have, the more options you'll have available to you. Just because the tie-out's there doesn't necessarily mean you need to use it, but it's way easier to use it if it's there, and just ignore it if you don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, generally, I use probably 8 tie-outs on my tarp, but many of my tarps have probably 16 to 25 tie-out points on them. In some instances, depending on how I set my ridge line up, I may take advantage of a few more across the top. But that's thinking of mine. I think it's the one Tigris Defender, I think it was called. And I really like that particular tarp. And I think maybe we'll talk a bit of why I like my tarp that I use the most.
Yeah, okay. And then we'll add the other stuff in as we go.
So there's a few things I've looked for when I was picking out my tarp. One was the tie-outs. The other was a material that was lightweight enough. Because not only is it the material type, like is it nylon, is it polyester, is it cotton, but the thickness, how heavy it is. I wanted something that was lightweight enough that it packed up convenient so I could take it, but also physically large enough that I could cover what I expect it to do. So,
and that becomes a balance, and I'm just interjecting there. That does become a kind of a balancing point once you've bought more than one tarp, I guess. Generally, as size go up, weight goes up, but you can find some real nice happy mediums. And to try and find that, you really have to look at the materials. So all the things you said, Ben, that's just kind of how they relate. Keep going on.
So I think mine is, and I'm guessing at this, I think it's a 16 by 8, or no, it's a 12 by 8 tarp, which is a big tarp. Really, it is. But it gives me a lot of flexibility in how I set it up. So, like I said, I want something that's lightweight, big enough to cover, and has that waterproofness, that material proofness that's going to prevent me from getting wet. And I'm going to tell you, no tarp, well, the very few tarps, there's a couple of exceptions to this, is 100% waterproof. The only exception I know of is actually a sheet of polyplastic.
Yeah, and I mean, they do want them to be somewhat breathable, only because it helps in the drying process, I think, is the big thing why they want these things somewhat breathable. Most of the, and I hate to say good tarps, but bushcrafting tarps or non-plastic tarps you get are going to be like a woven fiber, you know what I mean? And then there's going to be some sort of repellent and protectant put on top of that. So, and with a lot of these synthetic materials, and I guess just some materials off the top, like we said, there's like straight up plastic. You can use a sheet of plastic, there's nylon, there's poly ripstop, there's polyester, sil nylon, sil poly, and the list goes on. All these things have certain advantages, disadvantages, durability versus weight versus foldability and packability, because some of these things, you just stuff them into a sack, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Other ones have to be folded up. We'll talk about that in a minute too. These all come into play, so it's definitely worth looking for what the tarp's made out of and how that relates to what you're looking for, because the material, once again, it goes in hand with the weight, the durability, the waterproofness, the packability, the foldability. It's directly related, but so is price tag.
Yeah. And so the tarp, I did look it up just to make sure. It's 12.7 feet long, 9.5 feet wide. It is cat cut, which means it has it's not a straight edge. It actually curves inward.
Has those curvatures. Yep.
So on all sides, it has that W curve to it. So that allows me to hang it out fairly taut, and I really enjoy it.
And I like that feature too. A square edge, yes, it's going to seal against the ground better. Probably better in a winter, you know what I mean, to seal heat in. But in the summer, when I generally use a tarp, I like that cat cut because it allows a little bit of airflow. Not so much that you're getting a windstorm inside with you, but enough you don't build like the moisture on the tarp and stuff like that. Because as we sleep and we're inside these things, we breathe, we exhale water, we sweat, stuff like that. It can accumulate on the tarp itself. Ideally, it's going to run down, but depending on your configuration, it might stick on the ridge line. With that cat cut, it allows a little bit of airflow in, just enough, I find, so moisture's not so much of a problem.
Yeah. And this particular one, it says it's 210T polyester taffeal fabric. And so this, I was wrong, Defender, it's actually Bulwark. But either way, that is the tarp I have been using the most lately. It is probably my current favorite tarp. It is not my only tarp. Do not ask my wife how many tarps I have, and hopefully she never finds out the true number.
I actually started counting mine, and my number was higher than I thought. So I can't even imagine what you would have.
But yeah, I do like that bigger tarp, and it's because it gives me that flexibility to do it in many situations. And one of those things is the hammock. We talked about hammock camping, and that's why this one comes in really handy. It is more than long enough to go foot the head of that hammock and extend a couple of feet either way. I have a 10-foot hammock. And honestly, because of the curve and stuff, I still have plenty of room off either end to keep me nice and dry. If I pull the corners together, I can pretty well seal myself off from most winds that could come in. I can even cross them a little bit when I pull it in, and that helps. And so that's where that works. If I'm not hammock camping, it folds up decently well. The dimensions they have here are about 4 inches in diameter and about a foot high. So honestly, it's not that big. I can live with it. And so it gets thrown in my bag. I take it, even if I'm taking a tent or whatever, because it's a second shelter. If it's raining, I can set up enough room for a bunch of guys to get under, guys and gals, whoever happens to be with us. I can do so much with that.
Yeah. Sorry, I was tinkering with some settings in the background. As you know, we continuously have video problems from time to time, so I'm trying to fix them on the fly. Yeah. My current favorite tarp is actually a hexagonal shaped tarp. And I guess when we're talking about what to look for, shape does come into play there. Generally, you're going to get square, rectangular, a few other ones like asymmetrical, hexagonal. Sorry, what was that? Diamond. There's some different shapes out there, and that's something else to think about while you're looking. What are you going to be using this for? And that can dictate the shape. Oh my gosh, I'm reaching for words. Now, starting off, if you have no idea, you just want to buy a tarp, I would generally recommend a basic shape like a square or rectangle. Rectangle is usually the most common, followed by square. Then you get into the specialty kind of shapes. The specialty shapes are awesome to do what they do, but you kind of need to have the groundwork laid for tarps, if that makes any kind of sense. Like, I wouldn't have started with a hexagonal tarp, but now my go-to tarp is a hexagonal tarp. I got an 8x10 hexagonal tarp. It's my go-to. I like it. It's cat cut as well. It works good for my hammock. It makes a couple ground configurations that I like. It packs down the way I want it to. It's the one I like. In hindsight, I wish I had went to the next size up. I would have liked a 10x12 instead of the 8x10. Yeah. Just a tiny, tiny bit more room. But this one's still manageable, you know what I mean? But that's the only thing. I did sell myself a little short on that. So yeah, that's another thing to look for in a tarp, is what's the shape going to be along with the materials, weight, and everything else. Shape doesn't dictate so much the packability and weight and things like that, though. I mean, if you get some really weird shapes, maybe it's adding more material in. But generally the odd shapes you're going to get are going to take material away and actually cut them down a little bit, and you'll figure out what works for you as you go. First tarp, I would recommend, like I said, a rectangle, something around the 8x10, 10x12. You're going to have tons of room with that, lots of life out of it. You're going to be able to set up lots of configurations. You're going to be able to try some things. It's going to be a good starting point. Perfect start point for everybody? No, absolutely not. But it's a good starting point for most. Thoughts on that, Ben?
No, for sure. I mean, my first tarps were probably rectangular. When I got my first hammock, it came with a diamond shape, and that's really almost the square one, but you put it from the pointy end instead of the flat, and that went over the hammock. My problem with that is when the sides came down, in straight down rain, I was fine. And angled rain, as long as it was to my side, I was pretty fine. But if it came at a bit of a, from the head or the foot, I tended to get risk getting wet. I had to pull it down much closer to me. It was harder to get in and out. It made it a bit finickier to set up properly. I'm not saying you can't get a good waterproof setup in a diamond shape, but it's a little bit harder. And if you go on the sites that sell those, a lot of them sell the bigger tarp for more extreme weather. And since I don't know what the weather's going to be like, I tend to prepare for the worst case and hope for the best. And if I don't want to fully set it up, I can flip corners over. I can aerate. I can lift one end up and have the porch set up, I think we like to call it. And we'll talk about this. But yeah, regardless of what shape you get, there's the options to set it up are pretty vast.
Yeah, and that's the thing. There is a ton of different configurations and stuff like that, and just something I had brought up in the background here, and we're not going to talk about all of them because frankly your imagination is the only limitation you have on one of these. There are some basic setups though, and I mean some good ones to start with is like a typical A-frame, and then you can evolve that into like including a ground sheet with it or a lean-to shelter. These are all basic ones, but things like I said, just kind of off the cuff here, and you're not in this one, so I'll just go full browser. This is just an image I found online. I just searched literally for bushcrafting tarp setups. There's 60 on this image that I'm flashing up here now, from everything from a wedge to a lean-to to an A-frame. Yeah, you can't see it, unfortunately, Ben. I was hoping you could, but once again, it all goes to crap. But anyway, the moral of the story is there's no right or wrong answer here. There is only what works for you in the situation you're needing. If you're looking for a start point, like I said, A-frames, wedges, and lean-tos. They're the easiest. And then just go from there. But honestly, there's nothing wrong with taking your tarp, going out to the woods out behind your house or for a day hike or something like that, grab some guy lines and just say, let's see what I can do with this. Grab a buddy. One, you can learn from each other. And two, sometimes the extra set of hands while you're learning, and an extra set of eyes. They may see something and give you an idea that you didn't think of. I know I think we said this last week, when you, I, and a couple other folks went out to Cliff's Landing, we took one of your tarps into the woods and we just tried doing some setups.
Yeah, I've often done that. With that mech one that you have. After I got it, I was using it one day with some buddies of mine, and I mentioned the struggle I was having to find like the best setup for it. And we were all camping out. We just pulled it out of the bag. We didn't need it for anything, and we set it up in 5 or 6 configurations. And one of them I really liked. We took a stick and put it where we wanted the entrance, and we made the sort of the A there, came back to sort of a wedge, and folded some of the tarp underneath itself. So we created a floor. And we created a nice little tent setup with it. As you go to the back, obviously you run out of all room, but it provided plenty of room for 2 to 3 people and a dog if you needed it. It's just how tall you want it and how wide you can go. Some of the things, though, we can mention with that is you won't always get the trees in a perfect configuration. You won't always find everything you want. So having some experience with how to use rope and how to use sticks, walking sticks, paddles, boats, vehicles can often be things that you can tie to and get different configurations. And I've used all those methods to come up with the shelters I wanted.
No, and that's the thing. Like, what do you need to set up a good tarp? Your imagination and some rope. I mean, rope goes a long way. I'm not going to lie, but there is no right or wrong way, and that's the biggest misconception. Is everybody gets a tarp, and the first question they ask is, "How do I set it up?" Just go play with it. You know what I mean? Only time in your life somebody's going to tell you go play with your tarp. But literally. And if you need ideas, reach out to somebody that's used one before or just look online. But honestly, just go and play with it. I looked at some of the standardized setups, tried them. You know, they work. I think I said last week at the Bushcraft gathering, I used a typical A-frame setup, and it was great. And then I figured out what I wanted, and then got a hex tarp, which gave me options of sealing one end or the other end or both ends, making doors, things like that. Stuff I wanted, because generally I use my tarp for hammock camping. But yeah, there is no right or wrong. I had a thought, and it's gone, Ben. So anyway.
Yeah. There have been a couple. I have an example. There are a few tarps that have, and this is where it gets blurs to a tent. Zippers and doors.
I do have a tarp that has a zipper in it. Just so nobody thinks we're forgetting about them, I do see the comments over there. We have Red Bear Tactical. I think my DD Hammocks tarp is 3 meters by 3 meters. Danny says hi to us. Red Bear, I like a plow point for a good weather camping, and I like a low plow point for a ground setup, if that makes any kind of sense. We'll have to figure out a good way to rig a tarp off our bikes for our trip, Ben, because we go past Eagle Plains. There are no trees. And that's what Ben just said. You can literally use your vehicle and like a hiking pole. And I've seen successful tarps set up with just a couple hiking poles and the backside anchored down with some rocks.
Yeah, there's some really good ones that pull right off a motorcycle, off the handlebar and off somewhere near the tail of it, and then maybe a stick. And that's literally how they set it up. And you sleep next to your bike, which honestly, if I'm up in the north, and I might want to be really close to my bike. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay, I know what some of my problems are. I thought I could. Sorry, once again, I'm working on OBS problems in the background as well. I thought I could do them on the fly. Apparently, I'd have to shut down the stream and restart it. So all the changes I made, you'll see next week. Okay. Yeah, you can totally set them off your vehicles and stuff like that. The hard part becomes setting up your hammocks. That's where you gents are going to have some fun trying to hang those between the two motorcycles. I assume it's going to be a ground day. But now we've talked a little bit about setups. Is there anything else you want to talk about on that, Ben? I just see we're coming up on 20 minutes and we still got 2 topics.
No, we can stop at that. Like I said, do your research, play with it. It is the best way. Don't listen to Ben and Roberto.
Yeah, no. We're just a couple of guys with experience. We still highly encourage people, do your own research, ask questions, and of course, don't be afraid to make some mistakes. You learn the greatest lessons in life, sometimes not by being told how to do something, but by doing something the wrong way. And you never fail at anything, you just learn an unsuccessful way of accomplishing a task. Words to live by, right? That's the words of wisdom for tonight from old Uncle Rob. You'll probably never get any more. So but But yeah, so let's move on. A little bit on maintenance, because there is some good maintenance, there is some bad maintenance. Now, the number one thing that I'm going to say about tarps is the first time I buy them, I don't trust the stock rainproofing. I'm not going to lie. I generally buy them, I stretch them out to get them a little pre-stretched, and I don't reef on them. I set them up like I would normally use them, and then I generally buy whatever waterproofer is needed for that material, because there is different waterproofings depending on the material. Refer back to what we talked to before. And then I put 2 or 3 coats of said waterproofing on it. So in a lot of cases of our like nylon tarps and things like that, you can use literally tent water sealer. You know what I mean? But if you get into like poly, sil poly and things like that, you may have to go with a silicone-based water sealant. And once again, do your research. But long story short, I tend to waterproof mine straight out of the bag before I ever trust them. And a lot of them I know, you can take them out of the bag, you're going to use them, they're going to work fine. For me, this is my part of the maintenance. I like to ensure it's got a good coating, and I go over all the seams with seam sealer. That's just me. What about you, Ben?
I'm definitely with you on the seam sealer. If it has a seam, some of the tarps won't have a seam, but most of mine do down the center ridge, and it makes the ridge line a little stronger. I have not always done mine, but if I ever find that they start to leak, I tend to do something at that point. And the only one I have, like the one I took on my last trip, it leaked, but I don't know if you can understand how heavy the rain was.
And that's the thing. You said it earlier. Not most tarps are not 100% waterproof. With enough wind and water, it's eventually going to push through the fibers.
And that's exactly what it did. It wasn't a lot. Like, I'd be laying there and then I'd get like one drop, and it felt like it just drove clean through the tarp and hit me. It's like it just pushed through. And it would be one here, and a few minutes later I get another one. I got out and I looked. I couldn't see any, like there was no drips building up. So I think the rain was pelting that hard. It actually pushed through the tarp a couple of times.
And that's a possibility. With high enough winds, weird things will happen. Red Bear, I'm taking my Kelmite air mattress plus my hammock. Okay, so different options for where you folks are going. I guess the other thing on wet tarps, and I'm not passing you off there, Red Bear, I want to get to your comment. I'm just trying to keep us rolling too. The next thing on maintenance is and on the topic of waters, before you put these things away, make sure they're good and dry and aired out. You can't do anything worse than jamming your tarp back in wet. In a pinch, if you have to jam your tarp back in its stuff sack or something like that to get out of the woods, in an emergency, it's just too much or whatever, the weather is not going to clear in the time you got to leave, the second you get home, get that thing out of the bag and get it aired out. It does not take long for mold and mildew to build up inside these tarps.
And I think that's one of my best pieces of advice also, is to dry your tarp as soon as possible. And not every trip can you do it instantly. Like I've often had to pack a wet tarp down. And I think it's one of the things I will grumble the most about when I'm doing it, because I hate putting away my tarp wet. But if you have to do it, you have to do it. The other thing, I keep repair kits, tenacious tape, things like that. If you start to see damage to your tarp, deal with it then. Don't wait till it gets worse, because they can get catastrophically bad really quick. So deal with your things. Little tiny burn holes, like from like the flankers off your fire, or the sparks as you mainlanders call it. Those tend to not be too bad, but cover them up, protect that tarp with some proper tape. Tenacious tape that I've used have lasted a long time. If it starts to get ratty, you can pull it off. A little bit of heat and then reapply a new piece.
And Red Bear makes a good point here. If he can't get it away dry, he'll fold it and strap it to the outside of his pack loosely, so at least it gets a little air while you're walking. And that's the thing, keep some airflow through there. Once again, if you get mold or mildew, it's not just that, one, it's growing mold and mildew, two, that's going to deteriorate the tarp and it's going to create weak spots. It doesn't take very long for that to happen either. And on that, this is going to be a debatable suggestion, but I'm going to throw it out there anyway. Try not to leave it set up in direct sunlight longer than you need to. A lot of the a lot of the waterproofing I use has a UV protector in it, but nothing's 100% UV proof. UV breaks down everything. That's why paint fails over time sometimes, and why things get sun bleached, and why we suntan or burn or whatever. UV will deteriorate things. So if you don't need it set up, don't leave it set up. Don't just hang it outside and then be like, oh yeah, it'll be fine for the next 2 weeks, and there it is. And the second part of that is if you have the availability, I am lucky, I have a giant sunroom out here. I dry my tarps inside out of the sun. I just open up both ends of the sunroom. They're great big 4x8 windows. Tons of air gets through there, but no direct sunlight.
I have used, I think they're called snake skins from Hennessy, but I've also used loofahs. And if anyone's not knowing what I'm talking about, the mesh type stuff you buy for in the shower, if you pull a string out of that, that's a long tube of mesh. And what you do is you pile it on either side of your ridgeline, and when you're not using your tarp, pick up the things and then pull it across, and it makes a long tube. And it keeps the sun off the majority of your tarp. So the skins are just a tube again, but anything that contains it, and this is during the day when I don't need my tarp, if it's still set up, that's what I do, especially over my hammock. I just tidy it up, keep it out of the way, and then when I need it, I can just deploy the tarp pretty quickly. So it's still sort of set up, but it keeps the majority of the material off the sun. Because you're right, nothing's worse than the sun on your tarp.
If anybody wants to see what snake skins are, if you look back at one of our videos on hammock setup, believe it or not, we have a little video of Ben using his snake skins in there.
Great tools. I have used them many ways, many types, and you can pick up these loofahs for like $1 or so.
Get them from the dollar store. I think even at Walmart they're only like $3 for a good one. Good. So. Okay, 27 minutes. Continuing along, we're already starting to talk a little bit about this with the maintenance. Yeah, don't put them away wet. Try to keep them out of the sun if you can. Make sure that when you put your guy lines and stuff on, and do use your guy lines, keep your tarp taut. Not screaming tight so you can snap pennies off it, but taut. You don't want the wind to blow it around and ruffle it anymore than it has to, because all that movement creates friction in the fibers and it does lead to breakdown. And I mean, this is going to take a little bit of time, but the more you can stop it, the longer on, the better off you're going to be. And the last thing I would say is if you have the option of where to set your tarp up, you are better off to set up in hardwoods than you are softwoods. Softwoods tend to drip a lot of resins and stuff like that. They will get on your tarp and they'll make weak spots. If you get like fir sap or pitch or whatever you want to call it that drips down onto your tarp in the middle of the night, because it does happen in the summer when the stuff gets warm and it flows, if it embeds in, it's done, basically. It's now a permanent feature of your tarp, and it's going to lead to things sticking to it, and it's actually going to make that spot temporarily stronger, but then over time weaker, and it could spread to a weak spot, and then you might get ripping and stuff like that.
A light oil or butter can help lift that off.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah. Never thought about that. See? I just punched my mic. Ben is a wealth of knowledge over here.
The other thing that I've found that works, it takes a better setup, is if you can use bungee cord in your guidelines, it can maintain tension without having to put too much strength against it. And that little elasticity really helps when the wind is buffeting it, because if it gets loose in the wind, it's flapping all over the place. So you tend to pull it tighter and tighter. But the problem is that puts a huge strain and it loosens off. A huge strain and loosens off. So I have tried a few methods of using a bungee cord, even a short section, maybe at the tent or at the tarp or at the peg or tree, but just 4 or 5 inches so that it just can absorb some of that. And it tends to keep it a little bit better. And I think it reduces wear and tear.
Absolutely. So we got RM Shoots and Steve, the Drifting Spore, joining us here in the comments. So RM Shoots, and he says a really good point that neither of us mentioned, but it's really good advice. Hey gang, I'm not sure if you mentioned different colored tarps for better UV reflection or lower visibility perhaps. And yeah, color is one of the important things we should have mentioned way back with what to look for in a tarp. Do you want to be more camouflaged, or do you want to use this to stand out? A lot of folks will grab like orange tarps or hunter orange tarps. That way they can use them in the fall time if hunting season is going on, or as a signaling device in the event that they needed to. Other folks, they like the camo things. They want to blend in more. Darker colors are generally going to grab a little bit more UV and heat in the morning, so you're going to wake up a little warmer. White and lighter colors will reflect some of that. And we're not talking massive amounts here, but a noticeable amount. And you might be a little cooler. However, white's going to show dirt and stuff more. So once again, these are all things you're going to have to think about. Awesome. Thanks for pointing that out, RM. Appreciate that. Red Bear, I use carabiners and press-it knots to keep mine tight on a ridge line when I'm in a hammock. And yeah, I use press-it knots basically with mine as well. I'm trying to remember if I use carabiners or not. Yeah, I do, because I hook them into my hammock straps basically, or just above my hammock straps. And setting up a tarp like that above a hammock, that's an art in its own. Refer back to the hammock setup video we did. We talk about it in detail.
I have a couple of small carabiners I use for creating doors.
What is it?
I have a couple of small carabiners, and when I hook the ridge line, I take my two corners down, I put to the same point under the line, and then I use a couple of carabiners all the way up to different tie points, and that closes the door. It helps seal me in. And then when I want to come out, it's just to open up the carabiners, and I can flap that door completely out of the way. Using that same carabiner, I can tie it to a different tie point backwards and leave the door open to allow that airflow.
Yeah, so once again, more tie outs, more options. And the last topic we want to talk about, we are at a 30-minute mark, but this is fairly short, is how to put away. And here's the major debate you're going to get. Do you stuff it away? Do you fold it away? Frankly, do your research. There's different trains of thought on this. And honestly, I don't know what to tell you, folks. I can give you the trains of thought, and I guess you make up your own opinion, and then we'll tell you what we do. So both trains of thought are, if you fold it, you're folding it on the same seam over and over and over and over, and it creates a weak spot. On the flip side of that, some people think if you stuff it in, you put more wear and tear on the fibers, and it spreads them apart, and it could lead to leaking. You know what I mean? I don't know which one's more true.
So I'm a stuffer for a couple of reasons. I really did try the folding method, and it works really nice if you have a good spot to do it. But when I'm in the woods and there's dirt and stuff on the ground, and unless I have another person to help me fold it, and getting it into the bag was such a hassle. And then at one point, what I do is I grab more or less the center of the tarp and I pull it up, and I shove that down into the bottom of the bag, and then all the edges start coming behind it. And then I cinch it off, and it gets shoved into my bag, or I strap it outside, and that's how it goes. And it's done me well. I can honestly say I have no complaints about the stuffing method.
And I use the stuffing method myself, and I did fold. One, it was time consuming, and two, the ridges became noticeable the more I folded it, so I tended to believe more that I could see the constant folding on the same seam creating problems. It didn't in my case, I could just see it doing it. So my suggestion would be, if you fold, perhaps not always fold on the same line. And here's another problem that Steve's pointing out here. His tarp won't stuff back into its sack. He has to fold it. In that instance, much like mine did originally when I got it, I just bought a new stuff sack. You can pick them up on Amazon and stuff like that and just get them a little bigger. You can literally get like nylon sacks that are made for sleeping bags and stuff like that. It's all kind of the same thing. Get one that's appropriately sized for what you need. So stuff it into the sack you have, see how much is left sticking out, and guesstimate the best you can to the next size up that you would need to complete that.
I do find the heavier tarps stuff much harder, and the lighter tarps are easier to stuff in. But one thing I've noticed with tent manufacturers especially, they're starting to make bags bigger, because I think they got a lot of complaints that unless you have an industrial machine to fold it up and put it in,
it very rarely goes back in.
Yeah. And that's been my complaint with the polystrand ones from Canadian Tire, Walmart, the blue poly ones. I did want to say one thing about color. I would love a good orange tarp, personally. It's just most good tarps tend to only be made in camouflage. It really
I was going to say, brown or green seems to be the big ones I see.
Yeah. Coyote tan or camouflage or olive green are
your three main colors for decent tarps for whatever reason. But I'm like you. I like a good orange. To be fair, I would like an orange outside with a darker color inside, because at night, the orange, depending on lighting, can be really weird.
Yeah. Honestly, a two-color tarp like that, and inside color is different. I've had a couple that the inside is silvery, and that's, I do believe it reflects a little bit of your body heat back at you. It does help. I think my Anchorage, which is the one with the zippers, and I think that's the one you have. It's it has that in it.
Let's see. A couple more comments here. Red Bear, I'm a stuffer. I stuff it as I take it down so it never touches the ground. And that's kind of what I do now, too. And he's on doing his carabiners as he stuffs. Same with his hammock and underquilt. And that's much like me. I don't fold my hammock up. It gets jammed into the bag. And same as my tarp now. Much like Red Bear and probably you there, Ben. I just stuff it in as I'm taking it down. Hopefully it never touches the ground. Sleeping bag, same idea. I stuff it directly into the sack, straight out of the hammock. You know what I mean? And I just kind of break everything down. Hopefully it never touches the ground.
I do tend to leave some of my tie-outs on the tarp, the ones I most commonly use. And those I do wind up. I use the cross method. And then I just tuck them in and then throw them in. I seen a really nice tarp where there was pockets near all the tie-out points for storing the rope.
Nice. I do leave some tie-outs on mine as well. I do a figure 8 quick deploy. Basically take your two fingers like this, but keep your hand open. And you just do a figure 8 through your hand with the cord. Give it a quick loop, quick knot on it, and then you just kind of pull it out as you need it. But yeah, I leave a couple guy lines on, or tie-outs, whatever you want to call them. Usually my main corners and stuff like that.
Yeah, same. The only thing we didn't really mention is the guide or the ridge line. There is two methods. My favorite is a ridge line over the top. Some people put the ridge line underneath, so they hang their tarp on the ridge line. My only issue with that is I feel it could wear on my tarp a bit more. So that's why I like the more tie-outs. I have ones with tie-outs all along the ridge line, and I run my rope through those tie-outs and then hang my tarp from it.
And that's the thing. If you do have the tie-outs along the back, as Ben said, it's generally better to run that ridge line outside the tarp. It leads to less wear. Just as that tarp's blowing and chafing, it will create chafe spots. That is the one drawback I have with this tarp here. It does not have any tie-outs along the back. I have to run the ridge line underneath. And I'm not a fan of that. But I do think I might have a solution for that, and I'm going to think about it. And the other thing I'd like to try and discourage people from, though it's not completely wrong, I'm just not a fan of it myself, is literally taking the two tip tie-outs and just tying to them and no solid cord running in between. I'm not a big fan of that myself. It puts a lot of unneeded stress on the tarp because you have to pull that so tight to maintain the shape.
And so if you have that seam down the middle, it has the strength to do that. If you don't, it's more of a concern for me.
Yeah. Mine does have the seam, and I tried doing it, and I just didn't like how tight I had to make it so it kept its shape. And that's why I'm running it underneath. Now, I'd rather buy a new tarp, because it wasn't a super expensive tarp. I think it was about $80. And I know I'm going to get, at least 100 uses out of it or so, unless I'm in some really bad weather. That's not a bad trade-off for me. I wish it had the tie-outs across the top, and my next one will for sure.
Yeah. But I think the end result, because we've gone into over our time, is I think a tarp is, by both of our admission, pretty well standard practice for us to take one. Regardless of the type of camping we're doing, we almost always have at least a tarp on us.
I take a tarp even if I'm camping in the cabin.
Yeah. It is a great shelter. It allows you to enjoy your campfire at night, regardless of the type of camping you're doing. You can protect your gear. It has so many uses. It can be used in emergency situations, first aid type situations. Getting familiar with it, getting used to setting it up. If you get used to it, you can set up a decent shelter literally inside of a couple of minutes.
Yep, 100%. I can have my tarp set up over my hammock in about 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Other ideas for taking a tarp for all kinds of camping is they can make privacy walls. When the girls come with me and there's no outhouse or something like that, if they have to go pee in the woods or something like that, they like to put a little privacy screen up. Go so far away, give them some privacy. If you're group camping, you can use change shelters. Generally, everywhere we go, there's water. We'll do some swimming. Depending on who you take and who's there, you may need some privacy for changing. You know what I mean? There's just unlimited uses. Once again, anytime it comes to your tarp, your imagination is your only restriction.
The other question some people ask me is, do you take pegs for pegging it out? And my answer is generally I do take a few, but I don't take as many as I could. I take the bare minimum, and the rest I usually find local spots. Like I'll tie it directly to a tree, I'll find a root, or I'll just cut a couple of green boughs and quickly whittle out a quick one.
And that's generally what I do. I generally don't take my pegs. I make them when I'm there. I use rocks a lot for anchors. You know what I mean?
I've definitely done that. I've used logs. You don't need to, it doesn't have to be super heavy. It doesn't have to be super well secured in most points. But yeah, there's plenty of options, but I do tend to take 3 to 4 just because it gives me a few options that are quick to employ.
All right, so we're up on 40 minutes. Hopefully everybody enjoyed tonight's episode. Any final thoughts there, Ben?
Not really. Like I said, we said last time, you don't have to spend a fortune on a tarp, but investing in a solid tarp is a good investment. If you plan on doing any camping, any outdoors activity, I highly recommend having a tarp available. If nothing else, a small one-person shelter is a good one. We've said that some of the ponchos can act as that. You can get like I think 4x8.
Oh, that's what I should have brought in tonight. I totally forgot. I should have brought my ponchos in. Anyway, too late now.
But yeah, the cheap $20 nylon tarps or ponchos you get, I think they work out to like 4x8 or something. That is a solid shelter that can get you out of the wind and protect you, and it has a double purpose when you're going.
No, and my final thoughts would be, yeah, tarps are awesome. I mean, truly, there is no limit to what you can do with a tarp as long as you put your mind to it. I do encourage you to do a little research on it. We gave some basic points here. Follow that up. May not have to get as meticulous about it as we do, but I definitely suggest you do at least a couple minutes of research to look at shapes, types, materials, ideas on how you're going to set it up. Look at some YouTube videos. There's a ton of information out there. We barely scratched the surface. We could talk for hours upon hours about tarps and setups and stuff like that. I'm sure anybody else that uses a tarp could as well. And hopefully down the road, if you're new to this, you'll be one of those as well.
Yeah.
So I think we have an idea. Oh, sorry. What was that, Ben?
Said nothing gets you to compliments, but a well set up tarp in the woods.
Absolutely. I mean, just think about it. The one we used, once again, I'm going to pick on Cliff's Landing. We set one up to sit by the campfire because it was hammering rain and windy as heck. You know what I mean? And that was the only way we could enjoy the campfire.
Yep. Anyways, yeah. Good
All
night,
right, folks. Everybody in the sorry, I was just reading the last comments off there. It was just Red Bear and Steve. Go ahead.
I was just saying, good night, everyone. Get out there, have some fun. I'll let you do the closing.
I think you basically said it. We'll see you all next week, folks. Get out there, have fun, play safe, and let us know about it. We always love to hear your stories. Night all.